Wow, wonderful photograph. Please share the EXIF info. EXIF info please. What's the F number of the shot? Etc. are common comments that are often seen on a photographer's social media streams. In this video, let's discuss what EXIF info is all about and what is my opinion on seeking such information from photographers on their pictures. How do you do, guys? My name is Jayanth Sharma and I'm grateful for the time you spend on the Toehold TV. If you haven't already subscribed to our channel, kindly consider doing so. That way, you will get all these kind of tidbits of photography lessons when we release these videos. Also, please don't forget to ring the bell to let YouTube send you notifications when we have new releases. So, how many of you love to ask for this information? I'd be eager to know why you want to know the EXIF info of some shots you like. Please leave a comment below and let me know your thought process. Well, EXIF is the abbreviation for exchangeable image file. Let's say when photographers capture images, information such as the date of capture, the camera used, the lens used, the focal length that was used to capture the image, the aperture that was set, the shutter speed that was used, the ISO setting of the shot, was flash fired, what was the metering mode deployed, was the camera set to continuously focus or not, etc. are all stored in a file called the EXIF. This is embedded in the RAW file or the JPEG file that's created by the camera. Very often, photographers in the quest to learn photography want to know what aperture was used, what shutter speed was used, and perhaps what was the ISO of the shot. Okay, fair enough. But more often than not, such information, in my opinion, is useless information, and here is why I think photographers should stop wanting to know such information. Let's say you saw this nice photo of a tiger in Ranthambore. Looking at this image, if you ask, hey, what's the F number? And the photographer replies, I used F4, what are you supposed to be learning? Newbie photographers feel they are learning what aperture the photographer used, and if they are in a similar situation, it may be useful to do the same. Okay, fair enough again. But don't you think it's also important to understand other parameters of the shot, like what was the light like? How far was the tiger? What lens did you use, and especially at what focal length did you shoot? Also, in my opinion, 90% of these shots are what I call conventional shots, where there's no craft involved in making changes to the camera settings to produce an image that doesn't resemble the view from the naked eye. In fact, let's call it what you see is what you get kind of images. On that note, let me ask you a question. Ram is taking a picture at f4 and Shyam is taking a picture at f10, and both of them are on aperture priority. Whose picture would be darker than the other if every setting in the camera is the same? Please pause the video and leave a comment, or let me give you a few seconds to think. Alright, if you said Shyam's image would be darker because he is using a smaller aperture, thus less light comes in, then the answer, I'm afraid, is incorrect. The correct answer is both their pictures would have identical brightness and none of them will be darker than the other. Surprised? Why is that? Well, think about the most important part of the question, which is aperture priority. Now, because Ram uses a bigger aperture and Shyam uses a smaller, the shutter speeds are going to vary, but not the brightness. In fact, that's why the aperture priority mode is a wonderful way to capture images faster as the camera sets the right exposure values depending on the light. Have a look at this image of the lion I made in Africa. When I saw the lion in backlight, I shifted my camera's metering to a spot metering from matrix or evaluative metering I was using in order to measure the light on the rim of the lion. By doing so, I produced this picture, which is completely coming out of my visualization and not how it looked like in nature. Photographers, I think, while learning, should seek information about the logic of how a picture was shot rather than what settings were kept on the camera. So for this photograph, I'd expect a good student of photography to ask, how did you shoot this image? And not, what was the aperture? Because the learning of the shot is not the values of aperture, shutter speed or ISO, but the important aspect of how I ask the camera to measure light. That's on the rim of the lion using a spot meter. Now that is some learning. By asking photographers what values were there on the shot, it seems very silly sometimes. Instead, start asking about the logic of the image making process. When you see a motion blur panning shot, isn't it already clear that it was a slow shutter speed used? So why ask what was the exact value of the shutter? Won't that depend on how fast the subject was moving? Instead, try to find if the photographer used an aperture priority mode by using a smaller aperture to force a slow shutter, or did he or she use a shutter speed which was preset on a shutter priority mode to dictate the slow shutter speed. Make sense? Good students of photography ask the right questions. And as a good teacher, I always want to give my students the lesson rather than the settings of the camera. Heard of teach them fishing and don't give them the fish? This is exactly what I mean. Don't ask for EXIF information of the picture you see. There could be some image where there's really something you don't understand, and that's where asking EXIF information can really help. Before I leave you, here's a stunning picture of a hummingbird I made in Costa Rica. Ask me how I shot this image and I'll tell you about the famous multi-flash technique and shock you by saying the aperture was f14, the shutter speed was 1/200 and ISO 100. It seems crazy, right? That's because I used additional sources of light to produce this image to freeze motion and not a faster shutter speed like it seems. So guys, learn how to fish and don't ask for the fish. By the way, any photographer would be happy to share the EXIF information of the shots, but please understand it might not make much sense to you.